I'll never forget the moment I learned that my father had cut me out of his will. It was 2 days after the funeral. My father, Charles Langston, had passed away suddenly from a heart attack at 67. The grief hadn't even settled when my stepmother, Evelyn, handed me a sealed manila envelope with the estate attorney's name printed in neat serif font. We were sitting in the parlor of the house I grew up in, an elegant craftsman-style home in Durham, North Carolina, while guests from the service still lingered, balancing tiny plates of deviled eggs and sweet tea. Evelyn didn't look at me as she slid the envelope across the polished mahogany coffee table. She said, "Your father made some changes. You should be prepared." I was confused, but not alarmed. I had been a constant in Dad's life, his oldest daughter, his sounding board, the one who sat beside him during chemotherapy appointments 3 years ago, who handled his billing when he fell behind, who brought Evelyn flowers every Sunday even though our relationship was, at best, brittle. I took the envelope and opened it in my car, alone. The will was clear. Every asset, my father's house, his investments, his pension fund, even the classic 1969 Chevelle we restored together, had been left entirely to Evelyn. Not a mention of me, or my younger brother Kyle. I blinked hard and read it again. There had to be some mistake. I'm Natalie Langston. I'm 33 years old, and I've worked as a contracts attorney for over 8 years. I believe in clarity, in honoring your word, in protecting the people who matter. But that day, nothing made sense. Because my father had promised me, more than once, that his assets would be divided fairly. That he believed in balance. That he'd never let us be left behind. Instead, I was standing in a quiet parking lot with a piece of paper in my hands that screamed betrayal. The betrayal was bad enough. But the confrontation that followed? That was the moment I knew I had no choice but to fight back. And what happened when I confronted my stepmother and the lawyers she hired? Well, that was only the beginning. Because Evelyn wasn't just keeping the money. She had rewritten history. And I had proof. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes, hands trembling around the steering wheel, the will still open on the passenger seat. My father's signature stared back at me, steady, unmistakable. The same looping C I'd memorized from the notes he used to leave in my lunchbox in elementary school. Have a great day, kiddo. Proud of you. Love, Dad. The man who used to leave me those notes, could he really have signed this? I drove straight home, numb. Kyle called while I was stuck at a red light. He'd left the reception early, said he couldn't handle another one of Evelyn's grief performances, his words, not mine. Hey, I answered. You home? Yeah. What's up? I hesitated, unsure how to even begin. Then, we've been cut out. Dad left everything to Evelyn. There was a long silence. Then he said quietly, "You're kidding." I wish I was. I heard him exhale sharply. That doesn't make any sense. He told me, literally a month ago, that you were the executor. That he'd divided things evenly. My stomach twisted. He told me the same thing. Kyle and I weren't just siblings. We were survivors of a complicated family history, partners in resilience. After Mom died when I was 14 and Kyle was just 9, Dad went dark for a while. Not cruel, just unreachable. The kind of grief that folds a man inward. Evelyn showed up a year later, charming, soft-spoken, pretty in a polished, wine club kind of way. At first, I'd been relieved. She got Dad to smile again. She brought organization back into our home, added throw pillows to the couch, color-coded the pantry. She seemed harmless, helpful even. But it didn't take long before the little things started. Comments about how messy Kyle was. Suggestions that I was too intense for my age. A gentle but constant erosion of trust between us and our dad. Still, I kept the peace. Because Dad was trying. And I loved him. We had always been close, especially after Mom passed. I clung to him like a lifeline in those early days of grief. I'd sit outside his study and wait until he came out, just to make sure he didn't forget to eat. He used to call me his girl with the clipboard, always organizing, always making sure things got done. He trusted me with everything, his passwords, his medical decisions, his end-of-life preferences. I had power of attorney. I helped revise his living trust 2 years ago after his prostate cancer scare. That's why this will, it didn't just feel wrong. It felt engineered. That night, I dug out the binder where I kept all our family documents, birth certificates, health directives, even the folder labeled estate planning, drafts. I flipped to the most recent trust document. It was dated 14 months ago. It clearly named both Kyle and me as equal beneficiaries. I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding louder with every page I turned. Why change it now? And why cut us out entirely? My mind drifted back to one of the last real conversations I had with Dad, 2 weeks before he died. We were sitting in his hospital room, the chemo-4 trailing into his arm, the tray of untouched applesauce between us. He said, "Evelyn's been stressed lately. Thinks I should simplify everything." I'd raised an eyebrow. Simplify how? He shrugged, looking out the window. Consolidate the estate. Trust the right people. At the time, I assumed he meant naming me as sole executor. But now I wasn't so sure. My relationship with Dad wasn't perfect, but it was deep. Honest. Full of mutual respect. He used to say I was the only one who challenged him without making it feel like a fight. "I know you'll always do what's right, Nat," he once said. "Not what's easy. That matters." He taught me to balance my checkbook at 15. Made me open a Roth IRA when I got my first part-time job in college. "Don't count on anyone else to take care of you," he'd say, sliding the papers across the table. "That's your job." He raised me to be self-sufficient. But not to be invisible. Kyle felt it too. He and Dad were less verbal, more action-based. They'd bond over car maintenance and weekend football games, trips to Home Depot. Kyle had been the one to install Dad's stair lift when his mobility started declining. He liked being useful for Dad, I remembered thinking. We both did. Which is why it stung so deeply, why this betrayal burrowed under my skin like a splinter I couldn't dig out. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about being erased. About watching everything we poured into Dad, our time, our care, our love, get swept aside like it never existed. Evelyn didn't raise us. She entered our lives when I was nearly grown. She wasn't cruel outright, but she'd always kept a measured distance. Her version of parenting was hosting polite dinners and signing us birthday cards, "Love, Evelyn," instead of Mom. When Kyle struggled with depression in his 20s, I was the one who drove him to therapy. When Dad's cancer came back, it was me sitting with him during chemo while Evelyn coordinated bridge club fundraisers. But she knew how to play the long game. She made Dad feel comfortable. Important. Needed. She also knew how to make us seem like the problem. It wasn't just inheritance we were fighting for. It was memory. Truth. That night, I called Kyle again. "We need to talk to Mr. Reynolds," I said, referring to Dad's estate attorney. "First thing Monday." "You think he knows something?" "I think we need to find out who prepared this will. Because I'm holding a signed trust document from last year that tells a completely different story." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'll be there." I leaned back, the weight of the binder in my lap. The house was silent around me, but my mind was racing. If Evelyn had manipulated Dad into changing the will, whether through pressure, confusion, or worse, then this wasn't just a family disagreement. It was fraud. And I wasn't going to let her rewrite our history. Monday morning, Kyle and I walked into the brick law office of Mark Reynolds, our father's longtime estate attorney. The receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes, gave us a tight smile before leading us down the hall. "Mr. Reynolds is expecting you," she said. He greeted us in his signature tweed blazer, same style he'd worn since I was a teenager. His office hadn't changed in 20 years. Mahogany bookshelves. A dusty globe in the corner. Diplomas on the wall, slightly crooked. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, offering a firm handshake. "Charles was a good man. One of the best." "Then why did he leave us nothing?" Kyle asked, his voice sharp. Mark didn't flinch. "You should know, I wasn't the one who prepared the final will. That version came from Evelyn's private counsel. She said Charles wanted to streamline the process and work directly with a new attorney." I blinked. "You weren't involved?" "No. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 8 months. I reached out when I heard about the change, but I never got a response." Kyle crossed his arms. "That's not like him. He always looped you in." "Exactly," Mark nodded. "I thought it was odd, but he was sick. People change their minds. Sometimes they don't want to deal with the legal process again." I pulled out the folder from my tote bag and laid the original trust on his desk. "This is the version he signed a year ago. You notarized it yourself." He examined it carefully. "Yes. This is valid. And it clearly splits the estate between you and your brother." "Then how is Evelyn claiming full control?" "Because of this new will. If Charles had revoked the trust and replaced it with a new will, legally, the court defaults to the most recent valid document. Unless that document was signed under duress or undue influence," I added. Mark looked up, finally meeting my eyes. "Then you'd have a case." We left the office in silence. Outside, the spring air was too bright, the world too normal. Kyle muttered, "She played him." "I know it. She did more than that," I said. "She waited until he was weak. Then she isolated him, pressured him, probably fed him lines about simplifying everything. And now she's got everything." Back at home, the real storm began. First, it was the text from Evelyn. "Natalie, I'd appreciate it if you stopped spreading misinformation to family and friends. Your father's wishes were clearly stated. Please respect them." Then came the voicemail from Aunt Carol. "Honey, I know this is hard, but I don't think Charles would have signed something unless he meant it. Maybe you're just too emotional right now to see clearly." And then the email from Evelyn's attorney. "Any attempt to dispute the will be considered harassment. My client is prepared to defend her rights as sole beneficiary in court." I stared at the screen, rage bubbling beneath my skin. It wasn't just the words, it was the sheer arrogance. I texted Kyle, "We're not backing down." He replied, "I'm with you. No matter what." But the pressure didn't stop. That Friday, I got a call from my Uncle Dennis, Dad's younger brother. He always used to bring barbecue to family cookouts and tell loud jokes that embarrassed everyone. But this time, his tone was cold. He said, "Evelyn told us you're lawyering up. You trying to start a war, Nat?" "I'm trying to uncover the truth. You're going to rip this family apart." I laughed bitterly. "You mean Evelyn already did? I'm just not letting her get away with it." "You've always been dramatic," he snapped. Charles was a grown man. He made a decision. Maybe it's time you accept that he trusted Evelyn more than you think. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not the tidy tears of a composed professional. The messy, gasping kind, the kind you only cry when someone you love dies a second time. That's when Mara showed up at my door. She was my best friend since law school, sharp-tongued, brilliant, fiercely loyal. She'd flown in from Atlanta the day of the funeral and stayed longer than planned when she saw the cracks forming in my life. She said, "I brought wine. And a USB drive. We're going to figure this out." I opened the door wider. "You're serious?" She stepped in, dropping her bag by the couch. "You think I'm going to let some country club widow rewrite your father's legacy without a fight?" We sat on the floor with my laptop, the folder of documents spread out around us. I told her everything. Evelyn's sudden involvement in Dad's legal affairs. The way the will seemed rushed. The fact that Mark Reynolds hadn't even been notified. After 2 hours of combing through digital files, Mara leaned back. She exploited his declining health, she said. I've seen this before. It's called undue influence. It's hard to prove, but not impossible. What do I need to do? Start documenting everything. Emails, texts, photos, witness statements, anything that shows your relationship with your father, his state of mind, his trust in you. We need to establish a pattern. I looked at her. Are you sure it's worth it? She didn't hesitate. You are. That night, something shifted. I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a plaintiff. Still, the emotional weight didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier. The more I dug into Evelyn's manipulations, the more I uncovered just how methodical she'd been. 2 weeks before Dad's death, Evelyn had sent a group email to extended family, saying he was too tired for visitors. She'd switched out his home nurse during the last month, replacing her with someone from a trusted agency no one had heard of. She'd shut down his social media accounts. Dad had loved sharing photos of his garden and our old car, and replaced his phone with a new number to protect his privacy. Isolation. Control. Silencing. It all fit. But proving it in court would take more than outrage. It would take precision. The next morning, Mara and I started making a list. To do. Interview Dad's former nurse, Helen. Request medical records from his last 3 hospital visits. Review text history for changes in tone or phrasing. Subpoena Evelyn's new attorney's communication logs, if possible. Talk to Mark Reynolds about serving as a witness to Dad's mental capacity in earlier documents. The emotional conflict wasn't just external. Inside, I still wrestled with the guilt. What if I was wrong? What if Dad had changed his mind? What if he didn't trust me the way I believed? But then I'd find another letter. Another sticky note in his handwriting. A file I'd helped him organize. And I'd remember who we were to each other. Mara reminded me constantly. She said, she may have gotten to him at the end. But you had him for all the years that counted. Kyle said it too. He called one night and said, "You're doing what Dad would have done. Fighting back with facts. That's what he taught us." I smiled through the tears. Then let's make sure we win. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since the funeral. Not peace exactly, but purpose. I poured a strong cup of coffee, set up my laptop at the dining table, and opened a new file titled Estate Case, Langston vs. Evelyn. My fingers hovered over the keys for a second before typing the first section header. Key relationships and behavioral patterns, establishing trust and dependency. Mara had drilled this into me last night. If we wanted to make a case for undue influence, we had to show 2 things clearly. That my father trusted and depended on me, and that Evelyn had used her position to isolate, manipulate, or pressure him in his final months. That meant gathering not just paperwork, but patterns. Stories. Proof of trust over time, and proof of changes under Evelyn's control. By noon, I'd scanned and tagged dozens of documents, emails from Dad asking me to review his medical bills, handwritten letters about his retirement planning, photos of us working on the Chevelle in the garage with grease on our arms and smiles on our faces. I opened my texts with him, our last conversations about his medication schedule, the grocery runs I made, the thank you notes for helping with tax prep. His tone was always steady. Warm. Clear. Until the last few weeks. Suddenly, his replies became curt. Misspelled. Vague. I noticed one that said, "Stop worrying, I'm fine, Evelyn taking care of all." No punctuation. Not his style. It didn't read like him. I flagged it. Later that day, Kyle and I met with Helen, Dad's original nurse. We found her through an old phone number in the paperwork I kept from his last hospitalization. She agreed to meet us at a local cafe, a cozy spot where the servers still wore aprons and knew regulars by name. She walked in wearing a navy cardigan, eyes kind but tired. "Charles was one of my favorites," she said, sliding into the booth across from us. "He was stubborn, but sweet. We nodded. I said, Helen, do you remember why you stopped working with him? She sighed. I was let go. Evelyn said she wanted to streamline care with someone from her church. Did she give any other reason? No. But I'll tell you this, it felt abrupt. One week I'm managing his daily meds and prepping his meals, the next I'm told not to come back. And Charles, he looked confused. Not upset. Just resigned. Kyle leaned forward. Was he lucid? Helen nodded. Most days, yes. But he was tired. He let her take the lead more and more. I asked carefully, did you ever see Evelyn pressuring him? About legal documents? About decisions? Helen paused. I can't say I saw her forcing anything. But she'd hover. Especially when I brought him paperwork. She'd stand over his shoulder. Once, he asked me to leave a form for him to review alone. The next day, it was gone and he said he didn't need it anymore. He looked defeated. I felt my breath catch. Helen glanced between us. I'll testify if needed. Your father trusted you both. I know that. We thanked her, and as she stood to leave, she placed a small flash drive on the table. I kept his medication logs and notes from my visits, she said. Might help. It did. That night, Mara and I sat on the living room floor going through every item. Helen's logs were meticulous, daily observations, his weight, mood, even quotes from conversations. One entry, dated 6 weeks before his death, stood out. Charles asked if he had the right to revise his trust again. I said yes. He said, good. I need to make sure Natalie has what's fair. I covered my mouth, blinking back tears. Mara whispered, that's your case right there. He wanted to make it right. But something stopped him. The next day, I called Mark Reynolds. Mark, I said, do you keep notes from your client meetings? Yes. Standard practice. Do any of your logs mention Evelyn requesting changes on Charles's behalf? He paused. I'd have to check. Please do. Also, anything about revoked documents or instructions that never made it to filing. He called back 2 hours later. I found something. It's not a formal record, but I have a voicemail from Charles, left about 9 months ago. He said, Evelyn wants to simplify everything. I'm not sure if I should be doing this. Can we talk tomorrow? I exhaled. Can I have a copy? Absolutely. Every puzzle piece added pressure behind my eyes, but also lit something new in my chest, resolve. Mara compiled everything into a digital folder labeled Evidence, Stage 1. Helen's logs. Dad's old emails and texts. The previous trust document. Photos of us from Dad's hospital room, clearly engaged and connected. The voicemail from Mark. A signed copy of my power of attorney, dated after his cancer returned. We even found a draft will, never finalized, where Dad had added a clause leaving a portion of the house to Kyle and a note in the margin that read, ask Natalie to check taxes on this. Then, something happened I didn't expect. A call from Dana, one of Evelyn's friends from her volunteer group. I probably shouldn't be calling, she began, voice low. But I saw what Evelyn's doing, and I think it's wrong. Charles adored you. Everyone saw it. The way he lit up when he talked about your law degree, the car you restored together, your Sunday soup deliveries. Why are you telling me this? I asked. She hesitated. Because Evelyn bragged to me about getting him to change the will. Said she convinced him it would be easier legally and that you two were already well off. She made it sound like a done deal. I gripped the phone tighter. Would you be willing to write that in a statement? I'll do one better. I still have the text. She sent it to me. She forwarded it moments later. Finally convinced Charles to go with my attorney. Less chaos when the time comes. Natalie and Kyle can fight it if they want, but it won't go anywhere. I forwarded it to Mara. She replied instantly. Boom. Now we've got motive. Pattern. Intent. That night, I sat alone at the table, a yellow notepad in front of me. I wrote. What would Dad want? Fairness. Family unity. Respect for effort and care. No manipulation. No shortcuts. Then I wrote. What would he do if it happened to me? He'd fight. Calmly. Legally. Ethically. He'd say, stand your ground, Nat, make your case. And I would. The invitation came via group text on a Sunday morning. Evelyn. Family gathering this Wednesday at 5 p.m. Charles would have wanted us to move forward together. Please be respectful. I stared at the screen for a long moment. No details. No address. Just an assumption that we'd all show up at the house Dad had spent 30 years in, the one I wasn't even allowed to walk through after the funeral. Kyle forwarded it to me an hour later. Are we going? I replied, we're not just going. We're going prepared. We spent the next 2 days rehearsing, organizing the evidence into a clean PowerPoint and printed packets, one for every person likely to attend. Mara helped me organize the documents into tabs. Kyle practiced reading the affidavit from Helen, Dad's former nurse, while I memorized the order of exhibits like it was a courtroom trial. Because in some ways, that's exactly what it was. Wednesday arrived with the kind of sticky southern heat that made you sweat before you even left the car. We pulled up in separate vehicles, Kyle in his aging Jeep, Mara and I in my sedan. I could see familiar cars lining the circular drive, Uncle Dennis's oversized truck, Aunt Carol's Lexus, even Rachel's little blue Honda. As I stepped out, the weight of it all hit me at once. The memories. The betrayal. The quiet ache of knowing I used to walk into this house and feel something close to belonging. Now, it was a battleground. Evelyn opened the front door herself, dressed in a silky blouse and pearl earrings, her expression unreadable. Come in, she said. Everyone's waiting. The living room hadn't changed. Dad's favorite recliner still sat in the corner. The framed photo of our family, before Evelyn, still hung on the mantel, though it looked slightly tilted now, as if uncertain of its place. I scanned the room. Uncle Dennis sat with his arms crossed. Aunt Carol held a glass of iced tea like it was a shield. My cousin Rachel looked uncomfortable, tapping her knee anxiously. And in the center, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, stood Evelyn. She said, "Thank you all for coming. I wanted to have this meeting before the estate settlement is finalized. There's been confusion, misunderstandings. Natalie has concerns, and I wanted her to feel heard." That faux kindness grated like sandpaper. I stepped forward and placed the document packets on the coffee table. I appreciate the opportunity, I said calmly. Because I do have concerns. And I've come with facts. Evelyn's expression tightened. One of the lawyers, a younger man with slicked hair, started to speak, but she held up a hand. Go ahead, she said, forcing a smile. We're listening. I opened the first tab in my folder. Exhibit A, I said, lifting a copy of the original trust. This is the estate plan Dad signed with Mark Reynolds, his attorney of over 15 years. Dated 14 months ago. It splits his assets evenly between Kyle and me. Gasps rippled through the room. Uncle Dennis leaned forward. Wait, what? I thought you two were excluded. We were, I said. But only in the revised will Evelyn had prepared by her private counsel. A document none of us saw until after the funeral. I flipped to the next section. Exhibit B, notes from Helen Richardson, Dad's in-home nurse. Fired by Evelyn 6 weeks before Dad passed. In her care logs, she documents Dad expressing concern about revising his estate, stating, quote, I need to make sure Natalie has what's fair. Rachel's eyes widened. Aunt Carol whispered something to her husband. Evelyn cut in, her voice sharp now, this is getting out of hand. You're painting a picture that simply isn't true. I stayed calm. Then let's continue. I played the voicemail on my phone. Dad's voice crackled through the speaker, weary but clear. Evelyn wants to simplify everything. I'm not sure if I should be doing this. Can we talk tomorrow? Mara handed out transcripts. The room fell silent. I said, this was 9 months ago. One of the last times Dad contacted his lawyer before the new will appeared. He was confused. Hesitant. Not someone making clear legal decisions alone. One of Evelyn's lawyers cleared his throat. This doesn't prove coercion. I held up a hand. Let me finish. I flipped to the next tab. Exhibit D, text messages from Evelyn to a friend, Dana Walsh. In her own words. I read from the page. Finally convinced Charles to go with my attorney. Less chaos when the time comes. Natalie and Kyle can fight it if they want, but it won't go anywhere. Uncle Dennis stood up. You wrote that? He demanded. Evelyn's composure cracked. That was a private conversation. Taken out of context. Seems pretty clear to me, Carol muttered. I was trying to keep things simple. Charles wanted me to handle it, Evelyn insisted, her voice rising. Kyle finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. You kept him from us. You changed his phone. Replaced his nurse. And now you're trying to say he wanted nothing to do with his kids? He held up a photo, one we'd found in Dad's bedside drawer. It was of the three of us, from the summer before. Dad, grinning in the garden. Kyle and I beside him, laughing. He wanted fairness, Kyle said. He told me that. Told both of us. Evelyn's lips quivered. You always wanted more than your share. No, I replied. We wanted what he promised. I turned to the rest of the room. I'm not here to divide the family. I'm here to honor my father's wishes. And I have every legal right to challenge the will based on undue influence. But I'd rather we fix this the right way. The silence was thick. Then Aunt Carol spoke. I believe them, she said softly. Charles wasn't himself near the end. We all saw it. Dennis nodded slowly. This doesn't feel right. Evelyn's lawyer whispered something in her ear. She stared at me, face tight with fury, but something else too, fear. Then she said, we're taking a recess. And left the room. 10 minutes later, her lawyers returned with a proposal, mediation. We agreed, on one condition. Everything returned to the trust as outlined in the original document. Equal division. No contestation. No further claims on Dad's legacy. And that was how we left it. Kyle and I walked out of the house in silence. At the end of the driveway, he turned to me. You did it, he said. We did. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal mediation, phone calls, and document revisions. Mara handled most of the attorney communications while I worked with Mark Reynolds to re-establish the estate plan based on Dad's original trust. Kyle helped organize all the supporting affidavits and signed statements we had gathered. It felt like untangling a knot that Evelyn had tied with surgical precision, but one by one, each thread came loose. On a Thursday morning, I got the official call. Mark said, it's done. The original trust has been reinstated. You and Kyle are now the legal co-beneficiaries of the estate. Evelyn has signed the release. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. Thank you, I whispered. No need to thank me, Mark replied. You honored your father's wishes. That's more than most people manage. The relief was immense, but so was the weight of what came next. Dad's estate was substantial. Between the house, his retirement accounts, the life insurance, and the classic Chevelle we'd restored together, it added up to over $1.7 million. It wasn't just money, it was a legacy. And it needed to be protected. First, Kyle and I agreed to sell the house. It wasn't an easy decision, emotionally. Every room echoed with memories, good ones, hard ones, and everything in between. But we both knew we couldn't keep living in the past. We found a local couple who fell in love with the craftsman charm and promised to keep Dad's garden just the way he liked it. I wrote them a letter about him and left it in the kitchen drawer on closing day. Kyle said, he would have liked that. You always knew how to put things into words. I smiled. You knew how to get your hands dirty. He'd be proud of us both. With the proceeds from the house, Kyle paid off his lingering student loans and put a down payment on a home of his own, a small place in Durham with enough yard space to build his dream woodworking shed. As for me, I did something I never thought I'd do, I took time off. Mara almost fell out of her chair when I told her. She said, "Wait. Natalie Langston? Taking a sabbatical?" I know, I laughed. But I need it. I've been running at full speed for years. Between work, Dad's care, the estate battle. I'm tired. I need to breathe. She nodded. You've earned it. And more. One of the first things I did was establish a scholarship in Dad's name, the Charles Langston Foundation, for first-generation college students in North Carolina. Education had always mattered to him. He used to say, if I can't leave you money, I'll leave you knowledge. Now, he'd leave both. I donated $100,000 from my share to fund the scholarship for its first 5 years. The next thing I did was meet with Helen Richardson, Dad's former nurse. I said, you stuck your neck out for us. And I haven't thanked you properly. She waved me off. You don't need to. I do, I insisted. We're setting up a care grant in Dad's name. To support in-home caregivers like you who make the biggest difference, quietly. You'll be the first recipient. Tears welled in her eyes. Natalie, that means more than you know. It was the first time in months I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt connected. Grounded. Like maybe this terrible ordeal could leave behind something good. Then came the final, unexpected moment of closure. I was walking out of the courthouse after submitting the final distribution paperwork when I saw her, Evelyn. She was sitting on a bench near the fountain, dressed in pale gray, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She didn't look up when I approached, but she knew I was there. You won, she said flatly. It wasn't about winning. She let out a dry laugh. Of course it was. I sat beside her, but left space between us. You could have done the right thing without being forced. She turned toward me, finally lowering her glasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears, I suspected, but from anger. He loved you, she said. That was always obvious. And it made me feel like a guest in my own marriage. I was stunned by her honesty. She continued, you were his legacy. Not me. He didn't want anyone cut out, I said. He just wanted fairness. She nodded once, slowly. I see that now. But it's too late. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that hangs like humid air before a summer storm. Then I stood. I don't hate you, I said. But I'll never forget what you tried to take. She didn't answer. And I didn't expect her to. Back home, I stood in the small garage of my new place, the one I bought with part of my inheritance, and looked at the Chevelle. Kyle and I had agreed to keep it, rotate it between us every few years. I opened the driver's side door, slid in, and inhaled the familiar scent of old leather and engine grease. In the glove box, I'd placed one of Dad's handwritten notes. Drive straight. Trust your hands. Keep your eyes on the road ahead. That's what I was doing now. No longer chasing justice, just living in it. 3 months have passed since we closed the estate and signed the final paperwork, but I still keep that letter in the glove compartment of the Chevelle. Every so often, when I'm driving along the Blue Ridge Parkway with the windows down and the wind pushing against my face, I reach over and run my fingers along the envelope's edge. Just to remind myself where I've been. What I've survived. And why I chose not to give in to bitterness. Life didn't go back to normal. It evolved. Kyle and I talk more now than we ever have, weekly check-ins that are less about estate details and more about life. He's building custom furniture on weekends now, finding joy in the steady rhythm of shaping wood. He even taught a free workshop at a local high school last week. He texted me after. "Those kids reminded me of us. Of when Dad let us tear apart that old lawnmower just to see if we could put it back together." I texted back. "Yeah. Except this time, no parts left over. We're learning to be siblings again, not just partners in legal battle. And for that, I'm thankful." Mara flew back to Atlanta last month, but before she left, she pulled me into the longest hug we've ever shared. She said, "Promise me you'll rest." I laughed. "I'm terrible at resting." "You're better than you think," she smiled. "You just need a reason." Turns out, that reason came quietly and unexpectedly, through the scholarship foundation we launched in Dad's name. We received 137 applications in the first 2 weeks. I cried reading the first batch. Stories from students who'd lost parents, who were working night shifts while finishing high school, who wanted to build futures from the rubble of broken homes and early responsibilities, just like Kyle and I had. One applicant wrote, "My mom used to say, hard doesn't mean hopeless. I think that's what this scholarship means to me." I put that line on the homepage of the foundation's website. Every dollar we give feels like stitching something whole again from what was torn apart. And every time I see the name Charles Langston attached to a student's dreams, I feel his legacy anchoring me, steady and permanent. But perhaps the most important change came from something harder to measure: how I view myself. For so long, I saw myself only through the lens of responsibility. The girl who showed up, who filled in the gaps, who sacrificed, quietly and without fanfare. I thought that was my role, caretaker of stability. But I've come to understand something deeper. Standing up for myself, for Kyle, for Dad's wishes, it wasn't just about protecting an inheritance. It was about defining my boundaries. About saying, I matter too. My effort, my love, my integrity, they deserve recognition. Not just in sentiment, but in structure. Too often in families, the responsible one becomes invisible. Assumed. Expected. Forgotten until needed. But responsibility does not mean disposability. And love isn't proven by how much you endure, it's proven by how well you protect what's right. If you're watching this, maybe you've been there. Maybe you've been the one who kept quiet during family chaos, who paid the bills, who never got the thank yous, who sat in the hospital room alone while others reaped the rewards. I see you. And I hope you hear this loud and clear: you are allowed to protect yourself. To speak up. To claim the space and respect you've earned. I didn't take my father to court out of greed. I did it because legacy matters. Not just in dollars, but in truth. Dad taught me that money is only meaningful when it reflects values. And my values are built on fairness, resilience, and clarity. That's what won the case, not just legally, but morally. I think of Dad often. When I'm cooking soup and the kitchen smells like Sundays. When I'm reviewing a contract and hear his voice in my head, saying, double-check the fine print. When I'm under the hood of the Chevelle, sleeves rolled up, grease on my arm, whispering, you taught me this. I think of the man who didn't just raise me, but equipped me. And though he left too soon, he left me enough to stand. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a family conflict over money? An inheritance? A moment when doing the right thing meant standing alone? Tell me in the comments. Share your story, your truth might help someone else feel less alone. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more real stories about family, betrayal, healing, and strength. Because in the end, wealth isn't measured in what we inherit. It's measured in what we honor. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next story.